Welcome back. So, I don't usually do single album reviews anymore because I like to condense everything all into one shot. But when albums like this come around, I feel like I need to just praise this album of how absolutely beautiful and fantastic this record is. Spoiler alert, it's probably my album of the year, and it's probably going to be for the rest of the year. So, going into this record from my Before the Drop video, I had no idea what to expect when it came to the genre and what I was really getting into in general. What I got was a beautiful, minimal folk album, a very minimal singer songwriter record that really just tugs at the heartstrings, and it's just, this album is the only word I can describe it is just tranquility. It just sounds so beautiful, it sounds so quaint, it just feels absolutely just, it's almost like a magical type of feeling. And I'm using like these really sappy words, but this record is just absolutely beautiful. And Real House, like, it's the first song, and man, does it set up some amazing qualities of this record. And one of my favorite parts of this record is that not only is it very minimal, but that minimalism allows Adrianne's lyrics to pack such an amazing punch, both just in emotion, but as well as imagery. And one of my favorite couple of lines from this is that she talks about that she was 7 years old. She watched a movie that made her scared, and then it made her question her life, question about dying. And then there's another part that talks about how her mother made her laugh as she was either getting a procedure or something like that in the hospital. And then it kind of ties into, it's just like, that's the first time I saw you cry ever since your dog died. And then it goes into just these really just specific, very minimal details, but those little bits and moments that are strung throughout this song create such a beautiful portrait of how brutally honest and how just punchy the lyrics can be with such little amount of words to them. It's so impressive that you're able to create a universe, create an atmosphere, and create a tone just off the first track alone, just by using so little. That is an incredible feat that should not be understated. And the stories throughout even just the first song by itself could fill up an entire album all on its own. But thankfully, you get a whole bunch more of this album that just gives so many amazing moments of just this amazing, beautifully textured, but also minimal folk music. Sadness as a Gift brings up a little bit more of the volume and a little bit more of different instrumentation, a little bit more fuller in the mix. But man, just the clash and the textures of everything coming together, and also Adrian's vocals are like wavering, and she has this really captivating voice. And when you pair it together with such amazing lyricism that this album has, it just creates this beautiful feeling, and just it feels so warm, it feels so inviting, but it also has this feeling of just being really sad and kind of capturing this feeling of malaise. And then you get to Fool, which brings it up even more. This is probably the second most, probably a louder song on the record, but man, everything just comes together just so perfectly. Free Treasure has another one of my favorite lyrical moments where it talks about how Adrian, I believe it's with a friend, where they said they would climb rocks and go to like probably these little like forest areas and all these like little park things. And it talks about, it's such a minimal line on this record, but it's about just like water like from a washing machine. And just to think of that imagery just juxtaposed with talking about nature and talking about getting dirt all over yourself and getting dirt in your hands, and it just creates this such amazing, just I can picture that in my head just by just a couple of words. Like, again, that is just mind-blowingly impressive. Vampire Empire has is probably the loudest song on here, and it's probably the most chaotic, but it's actually quite a fun song. And there's a little part towards the pre-chorus that kind of changes it up a little bit, where it's not just like a straight note. It just sings like the regular note, and at the last line, it goes onto almost like this weird kind of higher kind of register or higher tone or register, and it causes the song just have that little bit more of a catching personality to it, where it's a little bit weirder, it's a little bit quirkier, but it still carries that beautiful atmosphere that this album brings. And then Evil probably has one of my favorite hooks and favorite choruses on the album. And I think this album really shines in the slower moments, like Real House, like Free Treasure, and like Evil. Evil is another one of those slower songs that really just builds atmosphere with such little, but allows those little pieces to build such a bigger picture of this record. And Cell Phone Says is the exact same way. Now, I've put a few dots around this album, and I could honestly say that this album is almost perfect. I am going to be so nitpicky with this critique, and honestly, it is totally just my personal thing. And if you see it as a positive, I totally understand. But Adrianne, as a vocalist and as the leading woman in this album, I just really want to hear her, because she is so captivating. She is so interesting, both lyrically, both vocally, and just the atmosphere she creates with this music and these instruments, that when a male vocalist comes into these songs, it almost just feels like a little bit jarring, and also sometimes it can feel a little bit too overpowering in the mix. But that's totally just my personal preference. I just want to hear Adrianne throughout this entire album. I just want to hear her, because she is the main focal point, and whenever she is singing on this album, she has my complete and full attention. And Donut Seam is where I think there's this one little spot, this one little blotch on this record where I feel like the male vocals, and they start off right off the bat on Donut Seam, where you get the male vocals that come in first. And it almost just throws me for a loop sometimes once you get to Donut Seam, is that I'm so enveloped in Adrianne that once a male vocalist shows up, it almost just feels like this is nice and all, but I really want to hear what Adrianne has to say. That's just a very, 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 very small little critique. But then it ends off beautifully with Ruined. And it, again, has an amazing chorus. And it's honestly one of the catchiest moments on the record. And I was listening to this album on my way back home, and I now still have that chorus stuck in my head. But this album, I've said so much, and I've talked about this so much, but man, what a beautiful, what a just mesmerizing, what a just tranquil and just beautifully feeling album. And this reminds me so much of just the folk music that I really love. And honestly, there's another comparison I could think of, is I really love The Tallest Man on Earth. And my favorite album from him is Dark Bird Is Home, which has that kind of almost easterny, maritime-y kind of sound to it. This album, especially when it comes to Sadness as a Gift, really brings that maritime, kind of eastern kind of feeling. And I'm talking about like Canadian eastern, like maritimes. Like, I was born in Nova Scotia, and if you know of kind of the bluegrassy kind of Americana type of sound that kind of portion of the country has, you get a full idea of what this sounds like. And it just, honestly, like, this album I can see just growing a very special connection for me. So I really want to give this a 10. I really want to give this album a 10 out of 10. But it's really just the moments where the male vocalist shows up, and it's really just a total thing on my preference. But I'm here for Adrian. And while the male vocalist does a great job for this record, I feel like Adrian's just brings such a presence and such an identity to this record that I just want to hear her alone. Because I think if you take out the other backing vocals, I feel like I would get such more of an amazing portrait of Adrian, especially for this record. So I am going to give it a 9.5. It is so close. A 9.5 out of 10. One of my favorite albums of the year, probably my favorite album of the year, and possibly one of my favorite listens of the past few years. And Real House, I forgot to mention on the intro, it's possibly one of the most beautiful songs I have ever heard, period. So if you want to check out a song from this album, I definitely recommend Real House. Free Treasure's fantastic. All these songs I can honestly recommend. So Real House, Sadness is a Gift as well, and Free Treasure. I love all of these songs. I love this album. I cannot praise this album enough. So even though if this video doesn't get any views whatsoever, I just want to put it out there that I absolutely love this thing. But if you did watch, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to me. And go listen to this record, and I'll talk to you again soon.